Hello and welcome to Fast Thinking. My name is Rebecca Scheurer. I'm the Director of Humanitarian Initiatives with the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center here at the Atlantic Council. In early 2019, tens of thousands of asylum seekers from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras arrived at the U.S.-Mexico border seeking asylum. President Trump, who had made immigration policy a priority from the moment he announced his candidacy, reacted by hardening enforcement, changing the conditions of asylum protection, and establishing the migrant protection protocols, which are more commonly referred to as the Remain in Mexico policy. 2 years on, with President Biden now at the helm, a similar crisis is brewing. Vice President Harris has been tapped to organize the U.S. response to the growing number of migrants and unaccompanied children arriving at the southern border. The question is, how should the Biden-Harris administration rethink U.S. immigration and asylum policy? And what, if anything, can the United States do to help address the drivers that are triggering people to leave their homes in the first place? Joining me today is my colleague, Jason Marczak, the director of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. And I'd like to start our conversation today asking him about his perspective on what's happening at the border. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Rebecca. So important to be doing this fast thinking on this incredibly important topic right now. I think what's happening at the border right now, it's in many ways, it's cyclical. We've seen this year on and year on. Around this time of year, there's a surge in migration to the United States, especially now that things are getting a little bit better in the U.S. with regard to COVID. And with a new administration and power in the United States, there is a tendency to look toward the United States for opportunities. At the same time, that what is really exacerbating this crisis are the push factors in the region itself, which, frankly, the last 4 years under the Trump administration completely ignored. Back in 2014, when Vice President Biden at the time put forward a plan for Central America that really sought to address those critical push factors. It needs to be a holistic, voluntary approach. That was scuttled by the Trump administration, instead with a policy of enforcing settlement only on the border and on border enforcement. So we need to go back to a holistic, long-term plan that is outcome-driven to address the root causes of what is pushing people to come north. Rebecca, you work so closely with organizations on the ground, and I'd like to get your perspective on what you're hearing from those organizations insofar as why migrants are coming now, not only now, but also why in general migrants are coming to the United States.
Yes. Well, first of all, I couldn't agree with you more in looking at the complexities around the push factors and that they really do exceed the pull factor we're seeing. And the complexities they're all intertwined. So what we're seeing on the ground and what we hear from migrants themselves through partners like the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies is that economic hardship and extreme poverty are in the forefront of driving people from their homes. And that's closely tied to violence and corruption that we see. And of course, climate change is a little more nuanced and subtle, but it's the driver behind a lot of these big disasters we've seen. You know, this last hurricane season was the most active season in the Atlantic on record. And two of the big hurricanes just pummeled the Northern Triangle region. And, you know, I know the latest numbers I saw, some 500,000 people were displaced, not to mention 200 people who lost their lives. So we have to look at these things as intertwined. I also don't think, this whole issue of COVID is an accelerator around risk. We can't talk about the economy hardships without looking very closely at how COVID has really introduced far greater risk for people. For the first time in 20 years, for example, the World Bank estimates another 88 million people will fall into an extreme poverty category. So that's a step back on that trend that we really need to address. We also have to look at the economic output from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And, you know, whereas before the COVID, we saw about 18% of that coming from remittances. But now across the world, where those living in other countries that would send in remittances are facing hardship as well, that number is likely to fall. So all of these things are contributing to very severe risk at the country level where people can't put food on the table and they don't have stable homes and predictable lives or livelihoods.
You know, and Rebecca, this is a long time problem. I mean, this is not a issue of 2021. You know, I look back to even civil wars in El Salvador and Guatemala and the peace accords, and countries never really solving the underlying social factors that frankly even led to civil war to begin with in El Salvador, Guatemala, or the destabilization in Nicaragua provoked by the United States in the 20th century. Honduras as well. We look at the issues such as natural disasters, Hurricane Mitch back in the late 90s. They destabilized Honduras, and Honduras never quite recovered. And then you combine that with, frankly, erratic U.S. policy. And not only erratic U.S. policy, but also erratic policy from the countries themselves. And the leaders of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador not having a committed long-term plan for their countries. And then put on top of that the utter failure of 4 years of the Trump administration, where a comprehensive partnership-based approach to resolving long-term challenges in each of the three countries was disregarded in favor of a policy that was only about fortifying the border, but not addressing the root causes of migration. And now we're seeing those problems. We're seeing what frankly President Biden and his administration inherited, which is a huge problem in all three countries. That, as you say, security, economic issues, magnified by climate. Very happy to see President Biden introducing Vice President Harris and overseeing these issues, mentioned the importance of climate migrants,
Right.
but also issues of rule of law and governance, and a lack of investment and a lack of frankly, will from all sectors of the three countries to have a comprehensive long-term approach. I think this also requires making sure that in the United States, our policy towards Central America is bipartisan and it's focused on not outputs, but outcomes, because it's outcomes in the end that will eventually change the dynamics in each of the three countries. Um, Rebecca, I'd love to get your thoughts as well on where do you see opportunities for a solution? Where do you see us potentially going?
Yeah, that's thank you for that. At our center, we're focused on bringing solutions to resilience and or to migration and climate change issues. And in that space, we really want to focus on opportunities that are on the horizon. Obviously, there's an enormous amount we could offer these countries, as you said, standing by them as long-term partners, transcending any policy and presidency and party shifts that we have. I think first and foremost in the climate space, we know that this is a growth industry around green jobs. OECD presented to the G7 in 2017 a report that estimated by 2030 we may see as many as 20 million jobs in this space, looking at agriculture, looking at wind, harnessing wind and solar energy. So we could do so much in standing by these countries and helping them advance their technology, and looking at jobs in the agriculture sector, for example, and transportation. So there are huge ramifications around climate, and we have to get ahead of this with some solutions to stand by those countries with some ideas.
We have a trade agreement with countries that is frankly underutilized, low levels of foreign direct investment. Why? Well, partly because of the horrific proliferation of corruption in each of the three countries, which disincentivizes domestic investment and foreign investment. At the same time, it's an overall drag on the economy. We formed our Northern Triangle Advisory Group this year in partnership with DT Institute, with policymakers, business leaders, civil society leaders from each of the three countries and the US to think through what could be some long-term solutions to some of the problems that stifle economic growth in each of the three countries. What could be the role of the private sector? How do we advance transparency mechanisms? And these are key issues, especially anti-corruption, which is so pivotal to the Biden administration as it's looking at its policies in the region, and also getting the commitment and the buy-in of each of the governments. We're also, of course, in a very challenging situation with regard to each of the governments, the countries, and also, frankly, the polarization that exists around the world in the region, and also the extreme polarization that exists in the Northern Triangle. And moving beyond some of that polarization is going to be critical for longer term solutions.
That's fantastic, Jason. I agree. This has been a pleasure talking to you. Before we go, I want to draw attention to also the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance that we've just set up this last year that aims to cultivate some expertise and harness this to provide assistance to governments like those in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala around hazards. In this case, noting how dangerous heat can be, for weeks on end. It can really have harmful effects to people's health and local economies in terms of crop failure and such. So those kind of examples that you put on the table, this is another one I want to draw attention to. All of these indicate that we have a lot to offer these governments. We should be standing very strong next to them for the duration. Thank you
Exactly.
very much.
And working with Mexico as part of that. Mexico has to be part of the equation.
Absolutely. They are
Uh,
a real player.
so this is fundamental. North America approach, and frankly, looking at how do we better incorporate the Northern Triangle into North America, especially on the supply chain front, to give access to the greater markets.
Thank you, Jason. It's been
Thank
a
you.
pleasure talking to you.